The lighthouse keeper's warning. The first time I saw the lighthouse, I thought it was beautiful. Gothic, haunting, perched on the edge of a cliff like something out of a romantic painting. The kind of place that makes you want to be a writer or an artist, to lock yourself away from the world and create something meaningful. It was exactly what I needed after the divorce, after losing my job, after watching my entire life in San Francisco crumble around me like a sandcastle at high tide. My aunt's letter had arrived at the perfect time. The lighthouse needs a keeper for 6 months. Room and board included, no experience necessary, just someone willing to be alone with their thoughts. I'd laughed when I read that last part. Being alone with my thoughts was exactly what my therapist had been encouraging, though I'm pretty sure Dr. Morrison hadn't meant quite this alone. The lighthouse stood on a narrow peninsula jutting into the Pacific Ocean, about 40 miles north of a small coastal town in Oregon called Mercy Point. Population 847, according to the faded sign I'd passed on my way through. The kind of town where everyone knows everyone, where the diner serves breakfast all day, and where strangers are noticed immediately. I'd stopped for supplies and directions, and the woman at the general store, Helen, her name tag said, had given me a long, searching look when I mentioned where I was headed. "Greycliff Lighthouse," she'd said slowly, not asking, just confirming. "You're the new keeper." "Temporary keeper," I'd corrected her. "Just 6 months, until they decide what to do with the place permanently." Helen had nodded, her lips pressed into a thin line. She was probably in her 60s, with steel gray hair and the weathered face of someone who'd spent their life by the ocean. "Your aunt was a good woman," she said. "Kept that light burning for 23 years, never missed a night, never once." "I know," I'd said. "She was meticulous about everything." "She ever tell you why she left?" Helen asked, and there was something in her voice that made me pause as I was reaching for my wallet. "She said it was time," I replied carefully, "that she'd done her duty and it was someone else's turn." Helen had made a sound that might have been agreement or skepticism, I couldn't tell which. She'd bagged my groceries in silence after that, canned goods, coffee, bread, eggs, enough to last me a couple of weeks before I'd need to make the drive back to town. As I was leaving, she'd called out to me. "Mr. Harrison," she'd said, and I'd turned back. "Your aunt, she ever mention the logbook?" "The Lighthouse Logbook?" I'd asked. "She mentioned it, yes, said I should keep detailed records of weather conditions, visibility, any ships passing by, standard keeper duties." "Right," Helen had said, but she wouldn't meet my eyes. "Standard duties, you make sure you read all of it, every entry. Your aunt was very particular about the logbook." That conversation had been 3 days ago, and I'd thought about it more than once during the drive out to the lighthouse, during the hike down the narrow path from where I'd had to leave my car, during those first few hours of exploring my new temporary home. The lighthouse itself was a marvel, 3 stories of circular rooms stacked like a wedding cake, with the light room at the top reached by a spiral iron staircase that made my legs burn by the time I'd climbed it the first time. Keeper's quarters were on the 2nd floor. A bedroom, a small bathroom with a shower that sputtered rust-colored water for the first minute before running clear, and a combined kitchen-living area with a wood stove and shelves lined with my aunt's books. She'd left most of her belongings behind, which surprised me. My aunt had always been so careful about her possessions, so organized. Yet here were her books, her dishes, her clothes still hanging in the closet, as if she'd left in a hurry, as if she'd fled. The 1st floor was the equipment room, generators, fuel storage, maintenance supplies, and a desk with an old desktop computer that my aunt had used for weather reports and communication with the Coast Guard. And there in the center of the desk was the logbook. It was a massive thing, leather-bound and ancient-looking, with pages yellowed at the edges. My aunt's handwriting filled page after page in neat, precise script. I'd planned to read through it systematically to understand the rhythms of lighthouse keeping, but that first night I'd been too exhausted from the move to do anything but heat up a can of soup, make up the bed with fresh sheets I'd brought, and fall asleep to the sound of waves crashing against the rocks below. I woke to the sound of the fog horn. It was 2:17 a.m. according to my phone, and the noise was deafening. a long, mournful blast that seemed to vibrate through the entire structure. I stumbled out of bed, disoriented, and made my way down to the equipment room. The automated system was functioning perfectly, set to sound the horn at regular intervals when fog rolled in. I could see it through the windows, thick, gray, impenetrable fog that had swallowed the world beyond the lighthouse. Even the ocean was invisible, though I could hear it, a constant presence in the darkness. I should have gone back to bed. The system was working as designed. There was nothing for me to do. But something made me walk to the desk, turn on the small reading lamp, and open the logbook to my aunt's final entry. It was dated 6 months ago, March 15th, the date she'd left and never come back. March 15, 2024, it read in my aunt's familiar handwriting. Visibility poor, fog rolled in at sunset and hasn't lifted. Standard horn protocol initiated, but something is wrong tonight. The pattern is different. I've been counting. I always count during fog and the intervals aren't right. The horn is sounding every 47 seconds instead of every 60 seconds. I've checked the equipment 3 times. Everything appears to be functioning normally. But the pattern is wrong and I can't fix it. More concerning, I can hear another horn, distant to the northeast, answering ours, but there is no lighthouse to the northeast. Nothing but ocean for 100 miles. I called the Coast Guard. They say all their systems show our horn operating normally at 60-second intervals. They hear nothing unusual on their recordings, but I can hear it, both horns, ours calling, the other answering. 47 seconds, always 47 seconds. I think it's time for me to leave. I've kept this light for 23 years and I've seen things I can't explain, but this is different. This feels like a warning. To whoever comes after me, trust what you hear, not what the instruments tell you. Count the seconds, always count the seconds. And if you hear the answer, if you hear the other horn responding, leave before dawn. Don't wait, don't hesitate, just go. The entry ended there, no signature, no further explanation. I sat at the desk, the logbook open before me, and listened. The foghorn blasted again and I started counting. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi. I got to 47 Mississippi before the horn sounded again. I checked the computer system. According to the automated logs, the horn was sounding at precisely 60-second intervals, just as it was programmed to do, but my count said otherwise. I counted through 3 more cycles. 47 seconds, 47 seconds, 47 seconds. The equipment said 60. My ears and my counting said 47. One of us had to be wrong. And then just as I was about to close the logbook and convince myself I was imagining things, I heard it. Faint, distant, barely audible over our own horn, but definitely there. Another fog horn responding to ours. A different tone, deeper, older sounding. Coming from the northeast, where there was nothing but empty ocean. I felt ice water pour down my spine. I stood up so quickly my chair fell over backwards with a clatter that seemed obscenely loud in the small room. I went to the northeast window and pressed my face against the glass, but there was nothing to see except fog and darkness. The other horn sounded again, and this time I was certain. It was real. It was out there. Something was answering our lighthouse. I thought about my aunt's final instruction. Leave before dawn. Don't wait, don't hesitate, just go. I looked at my phone. It was 2:34 a.m. Dawn wouldn't come for another 4.5 hours. Could I make it up the path to my car in this fog? Should I try? Or was I being ridiculous, letting my aunt's paranoid final entry and the stress of the past few months turn normal mechanical sounds into something sinister? I decided to do what any rational person would do. I started reading the logbook from the beginning. If there were answers to be found, they would be in those pages. My aunt had kept this light for 23 years. If something strange was happening, she would have documented it. She documented everything. The early entries were exactly what you'd expect from a lighthouse keeper's log. Weather conditions, visibility reports, ships passing by. My aunt's handwriting was steady and matter-of-fact. Clear skies, wind from the northwest at 15 knots. Freighter passed at 300 hours heading south, light functioning normally. Page after page of mundane observations. But as I read deeper into the log, as the months turned into years, I began to notice patterns. Certain dates appeared again and again with unusual entries. March 15th, 1 year earlier, fog horn sounding. Counted 47-second intervals 3 times. Equipment reads 60 seconds. Possible malfunction, Coast Guard says all normal. March 15th, 2 years before that, dense fog, horn active. Intervals feel wrong, counted multiple times, 47 seconds consistently, heard echo or another horn very faint to the northeast. March 15th, going back 5 years, 10 years, 15, every single March 15th my aunt had noted the same phenomenon. The horn intervals measuring at 47 seconds despite the equipment reading 60, the distant response from the northeast. And every year the entries became slightly more detailed, slightly more concerned. She'd been tracking this, documenting it, trying to understand it for over 2 decades. But it was an entry from March 15, 1998, just 3 months after she'd taken over as keeper, that made my hands start shaking. March 15, 1998, my first fog night as keeper. The previous keeper, James Morrison, left very specific instructions. He said on this date, every year I must count the horn intervals manually. If they measure at 47 seconds, I must record it. He said the instruments will always show 60 seconds, but that's not the truth. He said there's something out there in the fog, something that responds, and it's been doing so since the lighthouse was built in 1889. He said as long as we keep counting, as long as we keep the record, we're safe. But he couldn't explain safe from what. He was 83 years old when I took over, and he'd kept this light for 40 years. His hands shook when he showed me his logs. Pages and pages of March 15th entries all saying the same thing. He made me promise to continue the count, to document it, to pass the information on to whoever came after me. I thought he was senile, a kind old man who'd spent too many years alone with the ocean. Now it's 3 a.m., the fog is thick, and I've counted 5 cycles, 47 seconds, always 47, and I can hear something out there responding to our call. James was right. God help me, he was right. I sat back in the chair, my heart hammering. 1889. The lighthouse had been built in 1889, and this phenomenon, whatever it was, had been occurring since then. That meant over a century of lighthouse keepers, all of them experiencing the same thing every March 15th, all of them counting the seconds, all of them hearing the response from the empty ocean. But none of them, as far as I could tell from my aunt's log, had ever discovered what was out there, or why it only happened on this specific date. I checked my phone again, 3:47 a.m. I'd been reading for over an hour and the fog showed no signs of lifting. The horn continued its call, and now that I was listening for it, I could always hear the response. That deep, old voice from the northeast answering faithfully every 47 seconds. I thought about leaving. I thought about my aunt's warning. But I also thought about the fact that lighthouse keepers had been experiencing this for 135 years, and presumably they'd all survived it. My aunt had survived 23 March 15 THS before she'd finally decided to leave. What had changed on that final one? What had made her run? I flipped to the very last entry again and read it more carefully. The pattern is different, she'd written. Different from what? I paged backward through the log, comparing her March 15th entries from previous years, and then I saw it. In every previous year, she'd mentioned hearing the response from the northeast. Just one response mirroring our horn, call and answer, call and answer. But in her final entry, she'd said both horns, not our horn and its echo, both horns. As if the thing in the fog had stopped answering and started calling on its own. The fog horn blasted again, and I counted. 47 seconds. It blasted again, 47 seconds, and then in the silence before our horn was due to sound again, I heard it, the other horn calling first, not waiting for hours, initiating the sequence. And our horn responded automatically because that's what it was programmed to do, to sound at specific intervals, regardless of what other sounds might be occurring. But now the pattern was confused. Both horns calling, sometimes in unison, sometimes offset, creating a dissonant symphony in the fog. I pulled up the automated system logs on the computer, and they showed our horn functioning perfectly, sounding every 60 seconds like clockwork. But my ears told a different story. The pattern was breaking down. The call and response that had apparently held for 135 years was changing into something else. Something wrong. I made a decision. I needed to see what was out there. Even if I couldn't see through the fog, even if it was insane, I needed to try. I grabbed a flashlight from the equipment room and headed up the spiral staircase to the light room at the top of the lighthouse. My legs burned from the climb, and by the time I reached the top, I was breathing hard. The light room was all windows, offering a 360-degree view of absolutely nothing except gray fog. The lighthouse beam cut through it, a solid shaft of light that disappeared into the murk after maybe 50 feet. Useless for seeing anything at a distance, but still doing its job, still marking our position for any ships that might be out there. I moved to the northeast-facing window and pressed my face against the cold glass. Nothing, just fog and darkness and the distant sound of that other horn. I checked my phone again, 4:23 a.m., a little over 2 hours until dawn. I thought about my aunt's instruction again, leave before dawn. Why before dawn? What happened at dawn? I was about to head back downstairs when I noticed something. The fog was moving strangely near the edge of my vision, swirling in patterns that didn't match the wind. I focused on the area, and that's when I saw it. A light, not the steady beam of a lighthouse, but something else. Something that pulsed in time with the horn I'd been hearing. A deep, reddish glow that appeared for just a moment each time the horn sounded, then faded back into darkness. It was out there. Whatever had been responding to our lighthouse for 135 years was visible now, or at least its light was. And as I watched, it seemed to be getting closer. Each time it pulsed, it appeared slightly larger, slightly brighter, moving toward us through the fog at a steady, inexorable pace. I ran back down the stairs, taking them 2 at a time, my flashlight beam bouncing crazily off the walls. I burst into the equipment room and grabbed the logbook again, flipping through pages frantically, looking for any entry that mentioned the light moving closer, any keeper who documented what I was seeing. And then I found it, an entry not from my aunt, but from someone else. The handwriting was different, masculine, angular, the ink faded with age. It was tucked between 2 of my aunt's entries, a single loose page that had been carefully preserved. March 15, 1923. James Morrison, Keeper. This is my 13th March 15th at Greycliff. I have counted the seconds every year, heard the response every year, and documented it faithfully as my predecessor taught me. But tonight is different. Tonight I can see it. A red light in the fog, pulsing with a horn, getting closer. I don't know what it is. I don't know what it wants. But I've done some research in the town archives, and I've learned something about this lighthouse that explains perhaps why this happens. Greycliff Lighthouse was built in 1889 on the site of a previous navigation light. That light was lost in a storm in 1887, destroyed when the cliff collapsed into the ocean. The lighthouse keeper at the time, a man named Samuel Greycliff, for whom the point is named, was lost with it. His body was never recovered. The lighthouse that stands here now is the second one, built on more stable ground farther from the edge. But sometimes on foggy nights, fishermen reported seeing a light where the old lighthouse used to stand, out in the ocean where there's nothing but water now. The reports were dismissed as optical illusions, reflections, hysteria. But I think that's what responds to our horn every March 15th. Samuel Greycliff's lighthouse, still burning somewhere in the fog, still trying to do its job. Still calling out to warn ships away from the rocks. And every year it gets a little closer to shore, a little closer to us. I've measured it roughly over the years. At this rate, it will reach the current lighthouse position in approximately 60 years. What happens then, I cannot say, but I think whoever is keeping this light in 1983 should be warned. The lighthouse in the fog is coming home. I looked at the date again, 1923. James Morrison had calculated that in 60 years, by 1983, the ghost lighthouse would have moved close enough to reach the current position. But it was 2024 now, over 40 years past his prediction. Had his math been wrong, or had something slowed the progression, or, and this thought made my stomach drop, had it already reached us and then passed by, and what I was seeing now, was it coming back? The foghorn sounded again, and I heard both horns clearly now, ours and the other one, almost in unison. I looked out the northeast window from the equipment room floor, and I could see the red glow even from down here. It was much closer now, maybe only a few hundred yards away, pulsing with increasing intensity. And in the moments when it flared bright, I could almost see a structure around it. A tower shape darker than the fog, with that red light at its apex where the light room would be. I grabbed my phone, 5:11 a.m., less than an hour and a half until dawn. I should leave. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to grab my keys, run up that path, get in my car, and drive as far and as fast as I could. But I found myself rooted to the spot, watching that light get closer, feeling the building vibrate slightly with each blast of the 2 horns sounding together. And then I understood why my aunt had run, why she'd said to leave before dawn, because at dawn the fog would lift. At dawn, if that other lighthouse, that ghost lighthouse, was close enough, it would become visible. And something about seeing it clearly, something about it being fully present in the daylight world would change everything. As long as it stayed in the fog, stayed half visible, it remained whatever it was, a memory, a ghost, an echo of tragedy. But if it became solid, if it manifested completely, I didn't want to find out what would happen. I didn't want to be the keeper who finally learned what occurred when Samuel Greycliff's lost lighthouse completed its long journey back to shore. I made my decision. I grabbed my car keys from the hook by the door, took one last look at the logbook lying open on the desk, and headed for the exit. But as my hand touched the door handle, I heard something that stopped me cold. A voice, faint, distorted, but definitely a voice, coming from the direction of the northeast window. It was calling something, the same phrase over and over, but I couldn't quite make out the words over the sound of the horns. Against every ounce of common sense I possessed, I walked back to the window. The red light was very close now, maybe only 100 yards away, and in its glow I could clearly see the structure of a lighthouse. It looked old-fashioned, Victorian in design, smaller than the current Greycliff lighthouse. And there, at the base of it, I could see a figure, a man, standing on what appeared to be a platform or the remnants of the original cliff. He was wearing what looked like a keeper's uniform from the 1880s, and he was waving his arms, signaling something. The voice came again, clearer now. "Turn off the light, turn off the light." I stared at the figure. Samuel Greycliff? Was that possible? Was I really seeing the ghost of a lighthouse keeper who died 137 years ago? And why was he telling me to turn off the light? Then I understood. Our lighthouse was calling to his, had been calling to his for 135 years. And his lighthouse had been trying to answer, trying to make its way home to warn us about something. The foghorn was a warning system, yes, but what if Greycliff was trying to warn us about something else? What if there was a reason his lighthouse had been destroyed, a reason beyond just the storm and the collapsing cliff? I ran back to the desk and grabbed the logbook, flipping through it frantically, looking for any mention of why the original lighthouse had been lost. And there, in an entry from my aunt dated 2003, I found a note she'd made after visiting the town archives. Discovered something interesting. The storm that destroyed the original Greycliff lighthouse in 1887 wasn't a natural storm. The archives contained testimonies from townspeople who said the weather was calm that night, clear skies, no wind. But around midnight they heard a sound they described as like the earth tearing itself apart. The cliff where the lighthouse stood collapsed into the ocean, taking the lighthouse and Samuel Greycliff with it. Geologists at the time said it was coastal erosion, natural processes, but the townspeople whispered about something else. They said Greycliff had discovered something. That in the weeks before his death he'd been acting strangely, taking measurements of the tides, the currents, the rock formations. He'd told someone, the town priest, according to the records, that there was something wrong with the cliff, that it was hollow, that there were spaces beneath it that shouldn't exist. Caves maybe, or something else. He said the ocean was eating away at it from below and that the lighthouse needed to be moved before it was too late. He said there was something in the caves. Something that moved with the tides. Something that had been there longer than the town, longer than anyone could remember. The priest dismissed it as the ravings of a man who'd spent too much time alone. A week later, the cliff collapsed. Make of that what you will. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped the logbook. I looked at my phone one more time. 5:43 a.m. Dawn was coming, the sky already showing the first hints of gray at the eastern horizon. And suddenly I realized what Samuel Greycliff had been trying to warn his successors about all these years. It wasn't about his lighthouse. It was about what had destroyed his lighthouse. Something in the caves beneath the cliff. Something that moved with the tides. Something that was still there, still waiting. And our lighthouse, the new lighthouse, was built on the same peninsula just farther back from the edge, on the same geological formation, above the same caves. I felt it then, a vibration that wasn't from the foghorn. It was coming from below, from the rocks beneath the lighthouse. A grinding, scraping sound that I felt more than heard. The tide was turning, dawn was coming. And whatever had pulled down the original lighthouse in 1887 was still here, still active, still following whatever ancient cycle governed its movements. Samuel Greycliff's ghost lighthouse had been trying to make it back here for 135 years, not to haunt us but to warn us. to tell us what he'd discovered too late to save himself. This place wasn't safe. This place had never been safe. The lighthouse should never have been rebuilt here. The vibration grew stronger. Books fell off the shelves, the lamp on the desk flickered, and outside through the northeast window I watched as Samuel Greycliff's lighthouse finally completed its long journey home. It materialized fully as the fog began to lift, becoming solid and present, its red light burning brightly in the pre-dawn darkness. The figure at its base was still signaling frantically, "Turn off the light, turn off the light." And I finally understood the full message. It wasn't just about turning off our lighthouse. It was about stopping the signal that had been calling to whatever lived in the caves below. Our fog horn sounding every night when fog rolled in, sending vibrations through the rock down into those hollow spaces beneath the cliff. We'd been calling to it, all of us keepers, for 135 years, waking it up, drawing it closer to the surface. And it was answering. The floor lurched beneath my feet. Not an earthquake, something more localized, more deliberate, something pushing upward from below. I ran to the emergency control panel and hit the master shutoff switch. The fog horn went silent. The lighthouse beam died. Everything went dark except for the red light from Samuel Greycliff's lighthouse, now burning steady just beyond our rocks. The vibration stopped. The silence was absolute, broken only by the sound of waves and my own ragged breathing. I stood in the darkness, my hands still on the control panel, and waited. Dawn was breaking properly now, the sun touching the horizon, burning away the last of the fog. And in the growing light I could see Samuel Greycliff's lighthouse beginning to fade. Its purpose fulfilled, its warning finally delivered and understood. It was returning to wherever ghost lighthouses go when their work is done. The figure at its base looked directly at me one final time. I couldn't see his face clearly, but I felt his acknowledgement, his relief, his gratitude that someone had finally listened. Then he and his lighthouse dissolved into the morning light, and I was alone on the cliff with a dead, silent lighthouse and the certain knowledge that I would never turn the lights back on. I left that morning as the sun rose fully and the ocean turned from gray to blue. I made my way up the path to my car without looking back. When I reached Mercy Point, Helen was just opening the general store. She took one look at my face and nodded slowly. "You met him," she said. It wasn't a question. "Samuel Greycliff," I confirmed. "And I understand now. I understand why my aunt left." "It happens every 30 years or so," Helen said quietly. "Someone keeps the light who's sensitive enough to understand, who listens to what the fog is trying to tell them. Your aunt lasted longer than most. 23 years is remarkable, but in the end they all learn the same thing. Some lights are meant to go out. Some warnings are meant to be heeded, not maintained." I called the Coast Guard that afternoon and told them I was resigning my position effective immediately. I told them there were structural concerns with the lighthouse, that I'd felt vibrations that suggested the cliff was unstable. I suggested they send engineers to assess the foundation before assigning a new keeper. I don't know if they'll listen. I don't know if they'll find anything if they do. But I know this: Greycliff Lighthouse has been dark since March 16, 2024. The automated systems remain offline. And according to the fishermen from Mercy Point, when fog rolls in now, the nights are silent. No horn calling out across the water. No red light poolsing in the distance. No answer from the deep. I still have the logbook. I took it with me along with James Morrison's note from 1923. I've added my own entry dated March 15, 2024, describing everything I experienced. Someday maybe someone will need this information. Someday maybe they'll try to rebuild the lighthouse again, not knowing or not believing what lies beneath. When that day comes, I hope they read this. I hope they understand. Some lights are meant to go out. Some places are meant to stay dark. And some warnings should be heeded, not just recorded. The lighthouse stands empty now, dark and silent on its cliff. And beneath it, in caves that have existed longer than human memory, something waits in the deep spaces where the ocean has been eating away at the rock for millennia. Still there, still patient, still listening for the sound that calls it upward. But for now, at least, the calling has stopped.